Right. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. Welcome back to the part 2 of this presentation on the 5th Islamic CSR principle, the pillar of adil, the pillar of fairness and justice. Like I stated earlier on, there are 7 dimensions to the fairness and justice in Islamic CSR. 7 dimensions of fairness and justice in Islamic CSR. There are 7 of them. Number 1 is the supply chain fairness. Number 2 is fair internal wealth distribution. Number 3, workplace diversity. Number 4, value chain indigenization and diversity. Number 5, fairness in employees' well-being and treatment. Number 6, fair pricing. Number 7, fairness in reciprocity with local communities. So these are the 7 dimensions of fairness and justice in Islamic CSR. Before I elaborate further on these 7 dimensions, right, let's ask the question, why social economic justice and fairness in CSR and business practices? Why social justice? Well, first and foremost, one of the important aspects of operating a business is to have the public trust, is to gain and maintain and retain and hopefully build public trust. And trust is partly about competence, the other part is about character. So you want the company, you want your company to be able to deliver quality goods and services, right? But the other part is it has to do with the character. You want people to know, and you want to be a company that is trustworthy, that can be doing not just producing the right things, producing the things right, but also doing the right things. So people want to know that you are not cheating. People want to know that you are not exploiting, that you are trustworthy. So the company must, the business, the organization must portray, demonstrate both competence and character. And part of this character is the character of being fair, being just. People do not like, customers do not like, stakeholders do not like companies who are exploitative, who are seen to be unfair. And the second issue is, the second question is, how do we communicate trust in a social economic environment of corporate greed, of social inequality, of economic crisis, of skeptical and cynical general perception of business, where business is seen as exploitative, business is seen as being discriminating, business is seen as being greedy, wanting to extract more and more profits from the consumers, from the communities, from the suppliers, right? How do we do that? And there are tons of stories about wrongdoings, about mismanagement, is about their businesses and businessmen and women cheating the public, right? How do we communicate this trust? How do we communicate social justice, right? So there is this expectation of responsibility of business functioning, carrying out business in a responsible way, and being responsible, a big part of being responsible is to be fair, right? So in this context of marketplace, of industry, of society, where there is that high level of distrust or low level of trust of companies, are we, the businesses, behaving like a leader or follower, or are we actually part of the problem, right? So the importance of instituting a much more responsible and fair and just business practice is to show that we are part of the solution, not part of the problem. Right? So this is the rationale of business performing, business demonstrating fairness in its business operations. We would like to introduce to you an important concept and an important idea in businesses, an important idea in CSR, an important idea in Islamic CSR, and that is the idea of ratificatory justice, justice that rectifies the past mistakes and the sins of the industry, the historical and systemic injustice, historical and systemic unfairness that has been committed by businesses, by the players of the industry in your company. You will need to ask yourself, who has been unfairly marginalized in your industry, in your in your social ecology of your industry. Who has been marginalized? Who has been exploited? What parts of the environment has been exploited, right? So in rectifying the mistakes, the sins of the past, you might want to think of affirmative action to rectify the mistake, to rectify this past, the sins of the system, right? You need to think of how do you make things right, right? So that is the concept of ratificatory justice, to rectify the sins of the industry, the mistakes, the problems of the industry. And then so number one, the first dimension of fairness in Islamic CSR is the supply chain fairness, and there is a seal, a logo that is associated, is assigned to the idea of fairness in the supply chain. It is called fair trade. So fair trade as a concept is about social justice in the supply chain trading, that you make sure that the whole process of supply chain, buying the raw materials, buying from the farmers, from the fishermen, from the miners, right? The whole thing, the whole chain, the pricing that is placed by the different actors in the whole supply chain is fair. So especially in the context of unequal economic or market power, where certain parts of the supply chain has more power. So for instance, for car companies, right, for in the car automobile industry, the manufacturing company, right, the one who owns the Mercedes, the Toyotas, the Proton Sagas, right, those are the big players. Those are market power. That's where the power is concentrated in the supply chain, right? So how do you make sure that there is justice, there's fairness in the supply chain, where there's an unequal economic power, right? And that is the challenge of fair trade. And there are case studies, there are problems that have existed in the past that we can analyze, we can examine. There were cases with Starbucks, cocoa purchase with an African communities, where the farmers supply the cocoa, and there were issues about fair pricing. There were issues about buying it at the fair price. There's also in the rice industry, the Vietnam North Food Corporation, the Vietnam Southern Food Corporation. There's also an issue about buying the rice at a fair price, and to make sure and to ensure that the whole trading process, right, is fair and it's not exploitative. And you know that a lot of coffee companies, they sell it at a very high price to the consumers, and oftentimes, when it's problematic, they buy at a low price from the farmers, from the producers of coffee, producers of cocoa, right? From the farmers. So how do we make sure that this do not happen? And that has to do with supply chain fairness. And fair trade as a concept is to make sure that there is fairness in this whole supply chain trading process. So this, we also look at the north-south relations. We also look at the intra-south, meaning within the southern countries themselves, right? The south-south relations. Are there exploitation? Are there because of the hegemony of the unequal power within the supply chain? So certain players within the supply chain is being exploited, right? So in fair trade, we want to see. We want to make sure that the MNCs, the big businesses, the big factories are not exploiting the small businesses, the small workshops, the small home-based workers are not exploiting the farmers, the raw material producers, right? When there is fairness, then we can talk about justice in the supply chain, right? And then there is fair trade. So this is the first dimension of fairness and justice in Islamic CSR. So we move to the next one. The next one is the fair internal wealth distribution. This has to do with how money is being distributed within the organization, right? We talk about fairness in terms of employee wages, salaries, and rewards. We talk about fairness and diversity within ownership structure. So who owns the company? Are there fair principles being employed in terms of wealth distribution? Or we see the top management and the owners of especially big companies are getting disproportionate amount of wealth distribution, right? So they earn or given 10 times, perhaps 20 times the salary of the employees at the bottom of the pyramid, of the hierarchy of the organization, right? So in terms of Islamic principle, disproportionate distribution of wealth is very much considered against the principle of Islam. Is very much against the principle that the teaching of Islam. So Islam teaches fairness, and this applies to the distribution of wealth, right? Internally as well. So this is the second dimension. And the third dimension is the dimension of workplace diversity. So workplace diversity is about diversity of the employee composition, right? The common issues in workplace diversity is about gender and ethnic diversity. We want to make sure that that there is gender balance, gender fairness. We want to make sure that, especially in the multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, there's balance, there's diversity, there's fairness in the workplace, right? So we want to make sure that employees' composition reflects the society, reflect the community, reflect the country. So that's an important part of workplace diversity. The other part is to also think about affirmative action for the marginalized groups. And oftentimes when we talk about marginalized groups, there are certain groups of people who come in mind that we see being discriminated again and again. The persons with disabilities, right? People with disabled, certain disabilities, right? It could be physical disability, it could be visual disability. They are being discriminated, right? And even though we see there are laws being introduced by the government, oftentimes these laws are not being enforced or not being obeyed by companies, right? By businesses. We also want to make sure there's rural-urban balance, and the poor also discriminated the homeless, the patients with chronic medical conditions, HIV, diabetics, hepatitis B, and all that. Former inmates, we see how do we make sure that they are being included in our workforce, right? And that has to do with workplace diversity, and this is part of fairness in Islam. This is part of making sure that there is justice in society, and for companies to operate within the society, these issues of fairness, of diversity within the workplace must also be addressed, and this is actually part of Islamic CSR, right? So this is the three dimensions in part 2, right? We will adjourn this discussion, this presentation, and we will see you in part 3 in a while. So just to recap, the first dimension of Islamic CSR pillar on fairness is the supply chain fairness. We go up to the supply chain fairness. The second one is fair internal wealth distribution. This is about fairness within the organization, within the business. The third one is workplace diversity, is to make sure this fairness principle is to ensure that there is fairness in terms of employees composition, right? So this is the end of part 2 of our presentation. We'll see you in part 3. Thank you.